Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. Before I introduce our guest and topic for today, however, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. How are you today, Joelle?
I'm waking up.
Yeah. Early start again today?
An early start, yep. I've got my coffee here. It'll kick in soon. It'll be all good.
We're all hoping, including the listeners, that it kicks in soon. That was not a laugh, listeners. You should have seen the look that Joelle was giving me. All right, look, I won't put too much pressure on Joelle to start today as we wait for the caffeine to sit in. What we're going to do is introduce our amazing guest for today. She's a real leader in the field of psychological health and safety in Canada, and therefore also very much a world leader in the space. She was a key developer of the Canadian National Standard for Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace and the Guarding Minds at Work framework. She's a regular columnist, spokesperson, has even hosted her show, a show previously on the Oprah Winfrey Network. In her spare time, she also is the CEO and founder of My Workplace Health. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Joti Samra.
Hello and good evening from beautiful, sunny Vancouver, British Columbia.
Oh, so good to have you, Joti.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to be here and such a pleasure to talk about something that is so relevant to so many of us now more than ever.
Yeah, look, we're really thrilled to have you on, Joti. We've had a couple of Canadians previously, and I know that you very much have had a large part to play in the important work that's going on in Canada and really world-leading work. Even in Australia, where we think we're doing pretty good in this space, I think that Canada is still at that extra level up. So,
yeah, well, thank you. Well, we're pretty proud here in our small little yet vast country.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a great chat today, no doubt.
All right, Joti. To get us started, can you tell us what you like to listen to at the moment in the podcast space?
Well, what I was listening to this morning was actually Tardigrade Talks, which is our new podcast. So these days, as you well know, some of the time involved in setting up a podcast. So on my listening list this week, the only thing I've been able to make time for is listening to ours as they're proof before they come out. So Tardigrade Talks, which is a podcast about enhancing personal and workplace resilience.
Fantastic.
That's an important topic at the moment.
It is, definitely. All right, well, can you tell us, so Jason's given us the Cliff Notes version of what sounds like a really fascinating career. Can you tell us all about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a clinical psychologist if we go way back. And interestingly enough, once upon a time, I was immersed in forensic world. And I actually am a forensic specialist by background. Learned very early in my career that federal and provincial corrections were not my most exciting environment to be in. But I was very interested always in kind of legal systems and understanding the way things like civil forensic and disability systems work. And so that kind of stemmed my interest quite early in my career. I've been practicing almost 20 years now, but quite early on becoming very interested in occupational disability and things that contributed to people being off work for really extended periods of time. And that kind of started my focus on understanding the psychosocial factors and contributors to our health. And of course, we all know, I mean, my goodness, don't we know, especially at this moment in our history, how important work is for meaning and purpose. And when we're in wonderful work environments, I mean, life is pretty awesome, right? And when we are in hard, challenging, negative, disrespectful work environments, I mean, my goodness, we can barely make it through the day. And so I became very interested from a clinical standpoint of working around occupational disability, did that for a number of years, and then was recruited by, at that point, a brand new faculty at a university here in Vancouver. It was a faculty of health sciences, and that was of note because it wasn't a typical psych department. It was made of interdisciplinary professions. And at that point, I started to get very involved in both local kind of health authority and then provincial and national groups focusing on understanding workplace mental health, which, you know, I'll date myself here, but going back to about 2006, nobody really talked about or really understood.
So tell us a bit about what you're doing at the moment then.
Yeah, well, I took, I kind of, a number of things kind of evolved over the years that drove me to open my own business. So I'm now been kind of the sole independent for over a decade. I left my research scientist job at SFU, kind of went into my own domain, and I've got two companies now. So I've got a clinical counseling practice, Dr. Joti Samra and Associates. We've got a team of about 10 clinicians throughout the province of BC that deliver these days virtual treatment. And then I launched a national consultancy on workplace mental health called My Workplace Health. And through that company, we provide support to organizations around all the broad things connected to psych health and safety. So understanding their work environment risks, developing a cohesive psychological health and safety strategy. We do a lot of work with people leaders around teaching people the psychologically safe and emotionally intelligent skills that we know are so critical to good leadership. And then we do a whole host of work around enhancing resilience for all of us as individuals.
Yeah, so you're really working at both the workplace level and the individual level by the sounds of it.
Absolutely. It keeps me humble and keeps me good and informed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's great to see. Yeah, we very much operate from that shared responsibility model, right, for workplace mental health. It's not just an individual thing and about being resilient and mindful in really horrible conditions. It's also equally the employer's responsibility to create those healthy working conditions where people can thrive.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That shared responsibility, right, is and it's for everyone, like every single one of us in any work environment. This isn't just a leadership thing or just an individual thing or just an organizational thing. We all have a responsibility to show up in ways where we engage in psychologically safe interactions, right? And I often say we don't have to we don't have to even like, but certainly love everybody that we work with. But we have to show up in particular ways where we're civil and kind and respectful, and much like our families, right? We don't choose who's in that work environment. We don't choose our families. So we got to find ways to navigate around inevitable challenges that come up, and human behavior is complex.
Yeah. Well, not all of us get to choose who we work with. I did have to tell Joelle that she would be able to pick the people that she worked with in her team. So it's very important. They need to be able to get along with Joelle, and it can be hard sometimes.
I'm rough, man. It's a hard sell.
All right, Jodi, that's really, really interesting, and we'll find out more about your work and some of the things that you've done over the course of this chat today. But I'm interested because in 2008, one of our previous guests, Marianne Baton, the godmother of psych health and safety, right, met with you and asked you the question: as a researcher, what strategies do you think would help employees effectively address issues relating to workplace mental health? Do you remember that conversation?
I sure as heck do. and we'll often laugh because we're in different time zones. And this one Friday night, there I am in my small little research scientist office at the university. And it's Friday night. And I'm getting this email coming in from this woman that had seen me speak at a conference. I knew the name. We hadn't yet met. No such thing as really any focus on workplace mental health at that point. And she reaches out to me, and before we knew it, here we are chatting each other back. We haven't actually even met or spoken to each other. And we laugh now, so many years later, because she says, "What are you doing at work? It's 9 p.m. And I said, "I think it's midnight for you. What are you doing on a Friday night?" Right. And there began our discussion and a very long-term, both friendship, but fantastic collegial and mentorship relationship. She's one of my strongest, most inspirational mentors. And, back then it was like nobody was really talking about it. And I said, yeah, we need something that is just evidence-based. It doesn't cost anything, because organizations kind of want to start somewhere, but no one knows where to go. You go to good old Dr. Google. Well, have fun with that. And most business, which is small business, doesn't have deep pockets. And so there's so much online that they just need to know they're going to something that has credibility and evidence base. And so, there began, a decade plus later of a scope of work and national-based work, which of course translated into our national standard, all around providing a structure for organizations and the tangible outcome of that discussion. And Marianne at that point had just been put in charge of the workplace strategies for mental health, this commitment that was being given to workplace mental health. And that became one of our, who knew then, 1-year project that has now continued for many, many years. And so we created a number of things. We created a process for employers to be able to assess for psychosocial risks within their work environment, an employee survey, and a kind of review, kind of small A audit is what I like to call it, process that allows them to evaluate. We created a whole host of action-based resources and tools that they could use to evaluate. And the mainstay of that project was coming up with the psychosocial frame of the kinds of things in our work environment that organizations have an obligation to pay attention to and address that are tied to individual employee mental health.
Yeah, well, I think everyone is for the better. I think working in the psych health and safety space, that the two of you did connect that fateful night. It did launch some amazing work. Yeah.
Yeah, it sure has let us have a lot of fun, right? And as we know, the people we work with and work for are a critical part to our emotional health. And when we can connect with like-minded people and share a passion, like these are really critical things to our work environments.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the ability to do something meaningful as well is, a core pillar of that that positive psychology field as well. So, I think working in this realm, you definitely have that sense of meaning and purpose through the work that you're doing, which is a great thing too.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think meaning and purpose is one of the most important keys to resilience, right? In the long term, we will literally live longer if we have a reason to get up and meaning and purpose through our day-to-day work.
So can you tell us about the Guarding Minds at Work framework?
Yeah, absolutely. So Guarding Minds at Work was the kind of set of resources that are all public domain. Anybody can go access them and use them that were created. And that provided the psychosocial or work environment frame for the things within an organization that contribute to psychological health and safety. And so it's a series of just practical resources that employers can go access. There's no, no cost and there's no barrier, that they can start somewhere and start to learn about psychosocial work environment factors, the things that we need to pay attention to in our work environment. And what we're very proud of is the frame developed in Guarding Minds at Work became the frame that was adopted by our national standard. And so folks that go through and implement the Guarding Minds at Work framework within their organization are adhering to our national best practices.
That's fantastic. How did you come up with the name?
Well, Dr. Martin Shane, who is one of the researchers involved in Guarding Minds at Work, he gets all of the credit for the name, and he's the legal scholar. He likes to clarify, not a lawyer, because he did not practice as a lawyer, but the legal scholar, a legal research scholar that has been very pivotal in this domain of work. And he is really, talk about godmother. He's like the grandfather of psychological safety, and very passionate about the harm that can get created when we're not protecting our workers. And out of that, he had the name of kind of Guarding Minds, so that we're protecting our minds, and that ended up evolving into Guarding Minds at Work.
That's a really nice story. No, it's I do like that name, and I guess the connotations around it, and that we are protecting people's minds and keeping them safe. So how was the framework actually developed?
Oh, there was so much. I mean, research, scanning the data, right? And, getting very clear on what the literature was telling us about the factors in our work environments that contributed to better psychological health. We did a scan of best practices, and at that point, very limited, but the Health and Safety Executive in the UK had been very progressive at that point. They had a management standard frame. The American Psychological Association had a frame for psychologically healthy and work environments. As we kind of scanned what the literature was telling us, took a look at those best practices, and in particular HSC and APA. And then Dr. Martin Shane was our legal researcher and scholar that was very connected with what the case law at that time was telling us about the factors that organizations had to pay attention to. And we took all of that and then we combined and distilled it into what, you know, a couple of years of work that took us to get there, but distilled it into 13 different unique yet overlapping and not mutually exclusive factors. And so, so things like clear leadership and expectations. We know when we have clarity about what we're to do, when our one-up that we report to provides clarity on what's expected of us, we thrive, right? If we know what to do and what we're supposed to do and when we're supposed to do it, we thrive. And so you know, that's just one example of a number of the different work environment factors that we pay attention to. So that got us down to 13 and created the frame.
And how did you settle on the 13? Was there a bit of
you know, yeah, good question. Well, it was a very methodological approach that we took, right? Was that we've found ways of coding and seeing what things had commonalities, and we were trying to put things together, you know, kind of doing a little bit of a factor analysis. And I say little bit in that it wasn't, at that point, there's very little research that actually looked on work environment factors. So we had to be very creative. And there was an element too, because this is for organizations and it's not a research study kind of off on its own, that it also had to be very practical and it had to make sense to people. And so when we think of the construct of clear leadership and expectations, all of us, without knowing what that is, will know what that means, right? If we say workload demands, right? All of us will know what that means. And so there was also a very heavy eye on making sure that this had high face validity and was making sense. So we went through lots of consultation, you know, great people at a national level, at Sapna, who you've had on your show, from the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Marianne, of course, was pivotal in leading this work. We consulted with employers, large employers, small employers, human resources, health and safety, union. We had focus groups with employees and workers that were dealing with issues. So we took a very comprehensive methodological approach to making sure that we were understanding perspectives and concerns and the kinds of things again and again that came up.
Fantastic. That's a phenomenal effort by the sounds of it. And the sheer volume of different people and groups that you're involved in that process is, yeah, it's a little bit mind-blowing really to think about it.
Yeah, it was definitely a passion of love and you know, lots of hands involved in, you know, when we jumped to the CSA standard, and just, you know, I think the timing was also right at that point. People were starting to have a vocabulary and speak a little bit more about mental health. And I think there was a real intuitive awareness for people that these things matter. Like, and I think the general sentiment at that time was, you know, I know that this mental health thing means something, but I don't know where to start, right? And that would be the average. I don't even know what do I do? What does that mean? Does that mean I get a benefits program? And we say, well, sure, that's one factor. Because psychological support is one of 13 factors. So absolutely get benefits and give support to those that are struggling. But we know our frame and what's very unique and has been so, you know, I'd say, well, groundbreaking. I mean, this is the first standard of its kind in the world. And it provided a frame that was really different. It wasn't just, oh, we focus on the individual that has depression or anxiety or another mental health issue. It was, what are the factors within the broader work environment that maybe nobody in the work environment has depression or anxiety right now, but we know best practice, legal research is connected to individual employee health. And that's been a big shift for, you know, organizations to kind of think that way and understand that.
Yeah, we've found similar things here in Australia. And, you know, when we use the words psychological hazard, we sort of almost see the light bulb appear above some people's heads, because they sort of think about mental health as being this, you know, very clinical psychology focused individual level issues that really, you know, as a business, we just don't know how to deal with. But when you start using language of hazard identification, suddenly things start to make a bit more sense for them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the health and safety language, right? The health and safety folks get it, and they get it very well because they've already got that language. And I can look out my window and see the construction site, and those words make sense. So the kind of risks that we see physically, if you're not wearing a hard hat, and we use a guarding minds metaphor, right? That there's safety protocols for a reason. There's reasons that we teach people how to do their job, and that's very tied to physical injury. But very similarly, we know, I mean, probably most all of us can draw on some past workplace, right? Even if it goes way back to our teen years, where it's awful, where we had a leader that was you know maybe not a full bully in the true definition of the word, but incivil or disrespectful or harmful, and or people that didn't really care and communicate in emotionally intelligent ways, right? We all know when we're dealing with our own personal issues, which every single one of us will deal with multiple times, the difference between the person that can take the time to just check in and say, oh, Joelle, you're not yourself today. I just want to check in. Anything I can do to help you? Joelle, I see you haven't had your coffee yet. But like when we can do that,
that's a hazard, Jodi.
Yeah, that's a hazard.
For everybody's sake, woman, just drink the thing.
Yeah, but then versus if you're dealing with something and if I'm on you didn't do this right, or I don't see this, and I haven't even paused. Well, okay, that's a hazard. That's a hazard that's going to be more likely to increase the likelihood of you having a bad health outcome.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's a really good amount of information that you shared there, Jodi, around the development. I mean, it's over 10 years on now since the development of that framework was started on. And I think it's very easy to forget how much work actually went into the development of that and the consultation piece that happened all those years ago.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, 13 years. It's hard to build. Lucky 13. I think 13 is lucky, actually. So lucky 13, and yeah, it's amazing. And our standard came out, the CSA standard, in 2013, which is 8 years ago, and that sounds like a long time ago. But I say it's like in OC health and safety terms, we're still in the 1920s. Like we are so early that 8 years in the lifespan of standards and best practices, it's still a little toddler. Like it is just getting to learn how to walk. And so we're such early stages of that, because of course it's a voluntary standard, and so it's established as a best practice, but it takes a while for that to get embedded into companies and organizations and culture.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing some drivers this year, as we were talking about offline before, with more and more companies looking to adopt more of a health and safety approach to psych hazards. But speaking of the CSA Technical Committee for the development of the national standard, you're obviously one of the key and early members. When we're talking with Peter Kelly from the HSC about the development of the HSC management standards, he gave us a really interesting anecdote that apparently the first draft was actually written in a pub on the back of 3 beer coasters. Now, thinking back to the early discussions you were having around the national standard, do you have any memories of the things that you were talking about with the other founding members of that CSA committee about what needed to be in the draft and what things needed to be covered?
Yeah, great question. So you're getting me to go down memory lane, and that's a great story of the pub. So I was not in a pub, first of all. I was in a windowless university office. That's where the magic happened. Yeah, not quite as exciting. I'd say, one of the biggest discussions actually that we had is our standard is called the psychological health, is National Standard of Canada for psychological health and safety in the workplace. And in very early days, I know it's a mouthful. Psychological is a mouthful, and I know a lot of people have a hard time spelling. Like it's a mouthful and it's a complicated word. But it was something that I felt so strongly about for so long. And I think one of the biggest areas that we had some pushback early days from stakeholders was saying it should be mental health or mental illness, or the words should be around mental. And I was like, I am digging my heels in the sand about this one, because what we do when we think about, if we talk about a mental disorder or mental health issue or mental illness, is we think in black and white terms. So usually our brain says, I'm either in that category or I'm out of that category. category. And there unfortunately continues to still be a lot of stigma. I think it's going down, for sure, has gone down in the last 20 years that I've observed, but there's a lot of stigma. And so a lot of people won't put up their hand to, say, I don't know, run and sign up for that mental health issue workshop, right? It isn't as intuitive. And from a research standpoint, of course, you both know this well, is our psychological health is on a continuum. And so, on that continuum, we all have a state of psychological health every day, the same way we all have a state of physical health every day. And so the term was really important to me because it really is more inclusive and it's more accurate in describing our impact. And I believe that it adds less barriers to people understanding. It resonates in a different way, right? And so that was probably one of the biggest, I remember early days, and there'd be discussions back and forth. This was at the Guarding Minds at Work level. And similarly, we went to the Standard Committee. And in the end, psychological health won, which I was very excited about, but it was a very interesting dialogue back then.
Yeah, no, we're definitely seeing it these days. Mental health still has a stigma attached to it, and very much people see it as a synonym for mental illness. So I'm really glad you stuck your heels in back then and really, went into bat for psychological health and safety. I mean, that's where our podcast gets its name from. Although psychological, like you say, is a mouthful. So that's why we abbreviated it to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I think it's a really important distinction to make. So I'm really glad that you did that with the standard.
So while you were developing the standard, what sort of feedback did you get from industry?
So the CSA level, without boring you with too many of the details about how a technical committee operates, it's a very long process, very tedious process. And there's national review that's put out, and there's a methodology and approach for ensuring there's, kind of every key stakeholder voice is heard. I would say in a positive way, probably the most consistent message, like this was a big deal for us, for CSA, because it was the first time anything in the mental health world had been taken on as a standard at the CSA level. So that in and of itself was a pretty big deal. I'd say there were probably mostly like lots of behind the scenes happy dances of like, oh, wow, let's see where this goes. And it's going to resonate. And I would say the thing that probably strikes me most is how much it resonated for so many. And so being this area that was new and kind of, felt a little, I don't know, almost scandalous, right? Like, here's mental health and people are going to talk about like the stigma then, right? 13, 14, 15 years ago was far greater than it is now. So it was this kind of taboo topic. And, but I think what stood out is how much it resonated for everybody. And so I wouldn't say there was pushback as much at all as there was like this real interest to say, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Did you need to make many changes or adaptations to the standard following that industry consultation period?
Yeah, it's mostly the specifics, right, and the nuances of implementation and the approaches to take and wording and making sure, again, kind of inclusive and meeting all's needs. Initially in Guarding Minds at Work, the one change actually that we had, our initial frame was a 12-factor frame. This is actually kind of fun and interesting how it got to be 13. And of course, I was doing my researcher happy dance when we distilled it down to 12, and, it just seemed like a also good number. No, I don't mean that just a good number, but we kind of like 12. And we got to the CSA level and we had an addition of the 13th, which is how it became 13, because we're often asked, why is it 13 and not 12 or 14? Because of the beliefs people have about 13, I guess, right? It was physical safety was added. And so our 13th factor is physical safety. And the initial frame didn't have physical safety as part of it. But of course, if we're not in a physically safe work environment, that affects our mental health. And so that was the 13th one. And that was the most substantive change that we had. And other than that, the frame and the model remained intact, which, I felt very proud of.
Well, that's definitely an important inclusion to have in the framework, the physical safety element. And probably not one that people would typically think about when they're thinking about psychological health. But yeah, you're absolutely right. If you're in an unsafe environment, of course your mental health is going to be adversely impacted.
Yeah, and I think it'd probably be hard for a bunch of white collar academics to see through the eyes, I guess, of the construction worker where something can fall on them and kill them if they don't have the right controls in place. So that consultation piece and talking to employees who are actually experiencing this every day was obviously very important to identify that one. So what are some of the success stories of the standard then, Joti?
Well, it's getting a lot more leverage, and what we've started to see, particularly the last few years, and I will say particularly now, the past year, is people are understanding mental health matters, and I'd say the biggest success is that it's gotten such traction that well, I guess the most concrete one is ISO now has, of course, an international standard that's coming out, and we're very proud at the CSA level to have a mirror committee that was working with ISO and our standard, being the first of its kind in the world, has really had an impact at a more global level. So wonderful to see, for example, so many organizations in Australia kind of adopting ours and using guarding minds at work, and the leverage that's gotten internationally was, I would say, if I look back now, just honestly, probably surprising. I probably wouldn't have guessed that was going to happen way back when, it was the first iteration was launched in 2008. But pretty cool and pretty awesome, actually, that it's had that impact.
Yeah, it's one thing to have impact at a national level, but another at a global level, that's for sure. But what about within Canada? What are some of the success stories of, companies who have adopted the standard?
Yeah, I mean, organizations, I'd say one of the most important things it does is it gives them a consolidated frame. It helps them know what to do. And often, we hear again and again, organizations, they'll say, okay, we kind of weren't doing a decent job or felt like we were paying attention to this or that. But when the inevitable difficult situations arise in a workplace, right? Easy situations are easy. They don't affect us that much, but it's the difficult ones that, organizations that are saying, oh, the uptake is even stronger. We now get it. It gives us a frame. It helps us be able to do things in a way that feels easier. We have some predictability and control over approaches. It's adding this concrete frame, or tangible frame, I should say, to something that someone feels like this nebulous construct, right? We could go, what does psychological health mean, and how do we do something about it? And when people know what to do, they get that confidence. And I would say I've never seen a situation where that hasn't ultimately benefited everybody, the organization and the employees. And so, we've had lots of early adopters that, have been, starting to really get immersed in the standard. I'd say collectively, we still have a lot of awareness to do. It isn't something that all organizations understand. I do think that organizations are more and more realizing like this actually really, really matters to the success of our company.
Yeah, great. And we hear it's the most downloaded standard from CSA.
It is, yes, which is, again, really interesting, right? And speaks to it, yeah.
Yeah, no, amazing work.
So you mentioned ISO 45003. Can you tell us a bit about how the Canadian national standard influenced the development of the ISO standard?
Yeah, well, I feel like I can't speak in huge depth to that because we had a dedicated mirror committee of CSA members. That was a specific group that was working, but it was really consulting on our process, consulting on the successes, the challenges that we had. And of course, by the time it gets to the ISO level, it becomes international and much broader. So many other stakeholders. But, I think it's safe to say like we were really kind of the first pioneers that had a standard that we could speak to and say, okay, here's some things that we're learning as we go, and here's been the process, and here's what we're hearing, and so that piece has had I believe a significant impact.
Wonderful.
So Joti, it's, you've obviously been at the forefront, being in Canada at the right time, really contributing with the founding people behind, I guess, a standards approach or a framework around psychological health and safety at work. It's amazing the work that you've done. Looking into the future, what would your hopes be for mental health in the workplace?
Oh, great question. One is that every organization, whether you are the 2-person organization or the 2,000-person organization or larger, that they understand that psychological health and safety in the workplace matters. It not just matters because it's the right thing to do. It not just matters because of the prevalence of mental health issues. Selfishly, it helps organizations increase their bottom line, right? And for organizations to get this matters, and it's within my domain of responsibility to make sure I'm creating a good environment psychologically as well as physically. And I would wish that if we look at, larger organizations that have a dedicated structure, that we have some person in each organization that is responsible for promoting and ensuring psychological health and safety within an organization, so that each organization has a champion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's really important. I think that companies bring this on. Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the bottom line thing, right? We've had a number of reports done here in Australia looking at the return on investment that companies can get by investing in mental health at work initiatives, and it doesn't seem to have been enough in the past to have actually driven employers to change or invest more in workplace mental health initiatives. But I think that missing piece is that framework, as you say, like that gives companies really clear guidance around what does a psychologically healthy and safe work environment look like. And I think it's very important that employers, first of all, seek to do no harm. So that whole guarding minds is really important. And then we can start to look at how do we make people, happier and healthier when they come to work.
Yeah, win-win, and that bottom line in lots of ways. Retention, right? People are going to stay with you and be engaged. And, as I often say, the discretionary effort that employees demonstrate when we're in good work environments, where we're respected and where we're cared for, when the crap that happens in our life comes up, where we have organizations that are equipped to be able to support us well. My goodness, we go that extra mile, don't we? Right? And we do it with pleasure and joy. And that is so win-win for so many reasons for everybody involved.
Yeah, no, I see some people who say, "Oh, but that's going to cost money and it's going to reduce productivity because you're spending time doing these other processes and procedures around psych health and safety." But you're absolutely right. When you treat people right, then they put in that discretionary effort. They're more committed to the organization, and then your organization performs better. So I don't buy that argument by some that this is actually an additional burden or cost to a company. Looking after the people in your company is important for being competitive and being productive as an organization. So nicely put.
All right, Joti, we've got lots of listeners who are hopefully interested in working in this field of psychological health and safety, and maybe some early career professionals and some students thinking about career pathways. Do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to share with these people?
Oh, yes. One is follow that pull, right? And I think so much, and more than other areas, again and again and again, the champions that we see, and when I say that, it's just a person that's really passionate and starts a dialogue within their organization. And it's time and again and again and again, we see in organizations that it's one person that personally was really invested in something, that started to talk about it, that downloaded the standard, that read up on it a little bit, brought it to somebody at a staff meeting or a work environment, talked to somebody else, and that is where it starts getting embedded within organizations. And in some ways, what's really neat is we don't have, sure, there's some certifications and ones that I've been involved in developing that, e-learning or otherwise it exists to help people get certified for sure. But there isn't any set career path. And what I think is it opens the opportunity for so many, whether you're in health and safety or human resources or psychology, or my goodness, you could be an accountant and have a passion for this, and that it isn't sector specific either, that champions can be all kinds of people within an organization. So I think what's interesting developmentally where the field is at is, it's the wild open, what's a good metaphor? A wild open, I don't know, scape of something. So it's like the field is open and wild, and you can enter in lots of different ways. So there isn't one set path, that you can do what you do for a living and add on more specialized training around psych health and safety. And so it makes a really interesting field for that reason.
And so important to have that so many different disciplines contributing to the field as well. I think that diversity of thought and background and experience really creates a stronger overall picture.
Absolutely. And it affects all of us, right? That's the thing is we may say, as I look out my window, the hard hat policies, I may say, oh, this doesn't matter to me. Like, that's not relevant to what I do for a living. But there isn't a single one of us that would say the same thing for psychological health and safety.
Mm.
All right. So, Joti, you, I did say in the introduction that in your spare time, which I don't think you have much of at all, you do have your organisation, My Workplace Health. Where can people find out more about your work that you do there?
Yeah, well, we are very social media connected. And so we've got myworkplacehealth.com is our primary site. And we have another one that's drjotisamra.com. We have YouTube channels, Instagram, all the socials where we put out lots of information. So we place a real high value in our company on putting out public domain, which means free and evidence aligned resources. And so you can easily find us online.
Yeah. And what was the name of your podcast again for those that are looking for something really great in the resilience area?
Yeah, it is Tardigrade Talks.
Tardigrade Talks. And where did the name come from? I did some research, but for our listeners.
Well, tardigrades, as a fun factoid, are the most resilient micro animal that we have in our planet. And so it's a podcast about resilience. And our heart is to share inspiring stories of personal and workplace resilience. And so tardigrades, as a fun factoid, can live in outer space. They can live in 200 degrees Celsius water. They can freeze, they shrivel up, and they preserve everything. And they are the most resilient organism that our micro animal is what they're called. And if you Google them, they're actually really kind of cute in an ugly way. They're little water bears. And so, they're pretty cool. So that's the name for Tardigrade Talks.
Yeah, I'll definitely have to give it a listen. That's for sure. All right. Well, thank you, listeners, for tuning in today. Hopefully you got as much out of that conversation as what we did with Dr. Joti. Don't forget that we do pull out the best bits of these clips and put them onto LinkedIn on our FlourishDX channel. So feel free to check them out there. If you want to watch the chat rather than just listen to it over the podcast, we also will put the whole thing up on our FlourishDX YouTube channel. Joel and I are active on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with us, feel free to send us a connection request or just follow us. And you'll be able to find Dr. Joti on LinkedIn as well. So thanks again, listeners, and we'll catch you next episode.